A crying baby can stop an entire room. A conversation ends, heads turn. People look up from their phones. Even complete strangers suddenly pay attention. And what's strange is that most of them aren't the baby's parents. They have no responsibility, no connection, no reason to care, yet they still react. Sometimes with concern, sometimes with irritation, sometimes with an almost irresistible urge to make the crying stop. Think about that for a second. Why? Why can a sound made by a tiny human instantly grab our attention? Why is it so difficult to ignore? Why does it trigger such a strong emotional reaction? Because if you go back far enough into human history, ignoring a crying baby could have been one of the most dangerous mistakes a person could make. And the reason has less to do with babies than you might think. It has everything to do with survival. Imagine an ancient human camp, 40,000 years ago. The sun has disappeared. Darkness covers the landscape. A small fire flickers in the center of the camp. Families sit together after a long day. Children sleep nearby. Beyond the circle of firelight, the world is dangerous. Hyenas roam the darkness. Lions move silently through the grass. Leopards wait in the shadows. For ancient humans, night was not peaceful. Night was uncertainty. Night was risk. And then suddenly a baby begins to cry. Instantly everyone notices. The mother notices. The father notices. The grandparents notice. Even people who are not related notice. Because a crying baby is not just making noise. A crying baby is broadcasting information. Something is wrong. Maybe the baby is hungry. Maybe it's cold. Maybe it's sick. Maybe it's in danger. Nobody knows. But everyone understands that the signal matters. Now here's the important part. Human babies are incredibly unusual. Compared to many animals, human infants are remarkably helpless. A baby deer can stand within hours of being born. Many animals can move independently very quickly. Human babies cannot. They depend on adults for almost everything. Food, warmth, protection, movement, survival itself. For years. This sounds normal because we're human, but from an evolutionary perspective, it's extraordinary. Human childhood is one of the longest in the animal kingdom, and that created a massive problem. How does a completely helpless creature get the attention it needs before it's too late? The answer is surprisingly simple. Make it impossible to ignore over time. Evolution shaped one of the most effective alarm systems ever created, the cry of a human baby. Not just loud, not just emotional, specifically designed to grab attention. Scientists studying infant cries discovered something fascinating. A baby's cry contains acoustic features that humans find difficult to tune out. The sound rapidly changes in pitch. It contains harsh frequencies. It creates unpredictability. Your brain struggles to ignore it. In many ways, it functions like an emergency signal. Think about modern alarms, fire alarms, car alarms, emergency alerts. They're annoying on purpose. Their job isn't to sound pleasant. Their job is to force your attention. A baby's cry works in a similar way. And that's exactly why it can feel so overwhelming. Your brain isn't treating it as background noise. Your brain is treating it as important. But then something even stranger happened. The signal became so powerful that it affects people who aren't even parents. Imagine you're walking through an airport. A baby starts crying somewhere nearby. Immediately you know where the sound is coming from. You didn't choose to pay attention. Your attention was captured automatically. Researchers have found that people respond to infant cries incredibly quickly, sometimes before they consciously realize it. The reaction happens almost instantly. Your brain prioritizes the sound. Because for most of human history, babies were not only their parents' responsibility, they were the tribe's responsibility. Imagine an Ice Age community with 30 or 40 people. Every child matters, every future hunter, every future gatherer, every future parent, every future member of the group. Losing children carried enormous consequences. A tribe that failed to protect its young had no future. And because humans survived through cooperation, the burden of childcare became shared. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have repeatedly observed something remarkable. Children often receive care from many individuals: parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, older siblings, friends, even unrelated adults. Human beings evolved in communities where multiple people helped raise children. Some scientists call this cooperative breeding, but you don't need the scientific term to understand the idea. Humans survived by helping one another, and that means human brains evolved to pay attention when babies signal distress, not just mothers, not just fathers, everyone. Now remember this, a crying baby doesn't just trigger attention, it triggers emotion. And that's important. If a cry only grabbed your attention, you might notice it and then do nothing. Evolution needed something stronger. It needed motivation. So humans developed emotional responses to infant distress. concern, empathy, urgency, discomfort, sometimes even anxiety. Those feelings push people toward action. You want to check what's wrong, you want to help, you want the problem solved. The emotion becomes part of the survival system. And evidence for this appears surprisingly early in life. Even young children often react when they hear another infant crying. Sometimes they become distressed themselves. Sometimes they try to comfort the other child. It's as if the social wiring is already beginning to emerge. But then something strange happens in the modern world. The same system that once protected babies can sometimes feel overwhelming today. Most people don't live in small tribes. We live in cities. Apartments, airports, shopping centers. The cry of a baby can reach hundreds of strangers, and every one of those strangers carries ancient psychological machinery that was built for a completely different environment. Your brain reacts as if something important is happening, even when you have no role in solving the problem. That's why people often feel irritated by crying babies. The irritation isn't necessarily cruelty. It's the result of a signal designed to demand action. Your brain detects a problem. But if you can't solve it, the feeling remains unresolved. Imagine hearing a fire alarm and being unable to find the source. The discomfort lingers. A crying baby can create a similar reaction. Your attention is captured, your emotions activate. But there may be nothing you can do. And that's where frustration appears. This sounds negative, but in reality it reveals how powerful the system is. Because the goal was never comfort. The goal was survival, and survival often requires urgency. Modern brain imaging studies reveal another fascinating detail. When adults hear infant cries, regions associated with attention, emotion, and caregiving become more active. In other words, the human brain appears specially prepared for these sounds, not because babies consciously manipulate people, because generations of survival favored adults who responded quickly. The people who reacted protected more children. The groups that protected more children endured the pattern repeated for thousands upon thousands of years, and eventually it became part of what humans are. Perhaps the most emotional evidence comes from looking at human history itself. Every person alive today descends from an unbroken chain of infants who successfully attracted care. Think about that. Every ancestor you have ever had was once a helpless baby. Every single one. And somehow, through sickness, danger, cold, hunger, and uncertainty, they survived long enough to grow up again and again, generation after generation. Their cries worked, adults responded, communities responded, humanity continued. Without that system, none of us would be here. Tonight, somewhere in the world, a newborn will cry for the very first time. The sound may wake exhausted parents. It may attract nurses. It may cause concern. It may demand immediate attention. And that tiny voice will be doing exactly what millions of years of evolution prepared it to do. Sending a message that humans were never meant to ignore. Because beneath the frustration, beneath the noise, beneath the sleepless nights, a baby's cry carries one of the oldest survival signals in human history. A signal that once echoed through ancient camps beneath the stars. A signal that helped helpless children survive long enough to become adults. A signal that still reaches deep into the human brain today. So the next time you hear a baby crying, remember what you're really hearing. Not simply noise, not simply emotion, but an ancient alarm system so effective that it helped carry humanity from a fragile species struggling to survive into the modern world. And perhaps that's why ignoring a crying baby feels so difficult. Your ancestors couldn't afford to ignore it, and deep down, a part of your brain still remembers.